This is Grafana. This is the open source dashboard visualizer. It supports hundreds of different unique data sources and formats. We have millions of users every day, both open source and Grafana Cloud SaaS product. And this is, the clicker works, this is Tempo. This is Grafana's open source tracing database used for both storing and querying traces. That's kind of what we're going to base the talk around today, is our work basically around Tempo and the documentation that we did. So, you want to do a documentation adventure? Well, how do you start?
This quest for documentation can take many twists and turns.
Just the feedback.
You never know when you're going to meet the party of your dreams. Sometimes it's at a ski lodge in the Canadian Rockies at Whistler. 2022, I started at Grafana. My second week was at Grafana Fest, which is our first company-wide meeting since COVID. And a friend of mine, who I had run a one-shot for, said, "Oh, you've got to meet my DM." He walks me across the convention center over to Heds.
And Kim says, "Oh, I'm a D&D player. I hear you're a D&D player." I said, "Well, you know, I'm something of a D&D player myself." And we kind of got talking, and then she said, "Well, I'm here to kind of write docs for Tempo." And I said, "What?" Because in late 2020, I started evangelizing Tempo basically for both our open source and paid community. In the GTM group. It had just come out. I'd been embedded into the Tempo group, and so I started working with Tempo. So it seemed like a match made in heaven. We immediately just found the person that we needed to talk to.
So we want to help our party members find success, and that means understanding what their needs are. What are their pain points? Do they need help with configuration? Do they need examples? Do they need setup guides? Our users tell us. They leave comments on issues. They communicate with us via Slack. And also, when I first started, our table of contents for the Tempo documentation didn't have things like, what is tracing? Why should you care? What are setup? How do you use it? We had nothing for that. So we had a lot of pain points for our users. How are they going to adopt and discover the joy of using tracing if they don't have ideas? Our quest was revealed to us.
So now we had to create a party. Well, we kind of already created a party, but you need to create a party. So how do you find these people that you can work with as technical writers who can actually help you kind of go through all of this stuff and give you the technical background as well? So you've got to identify the right players. They've got to understand the requirements for the software. And by that, they need to understand the product themselves. They need to understand the use cases, and they need to understand what users want. They need to have deep knowledge of that product. They also have to ensure that they know that the features that are coming up, so things like roadmaps, if they're embedded with particular project teams, if they're embedded with particular product teams, this makes it a lot easier. Ideally, they need to have some connections to the rest of the organization. A lot of organizations have obviously disparate teams within their organization. Ensuring that you know how to cross-communicate with those different groups is really key. I started 5 years ago. There were about 100 people at Grafana. There's now well over 1,000. So being able to have those connections, be able to go to the right groups, to understand who the right people are is paramount to being able to get to the relevant stakeholders. And then finally, you need to carve some time out. It's all very well kind of saying, yeah, we're going to do a load of great documentation. But if you've never actually in a position where you can do so, if you never have the time, that's a problem. So anybody that kind of volunteers for this kind of work has to ensure that they're going to put the time in.
So how do you find your players? You need to actively engage your teams and your community. Raise the clarion call. Post your quest markers in community forums, Slack channels, tech doc forums, wherever there might be potential party members. Sometimes the people who point out issues in the docs might be willing to actually do the work to address those issues as well. Frustration can be a powerful tool for change. Advertise on your communications platforms. Go where your users are to find your documentation evangelists. You know, if they have interest in projects, chances are they're going to be passionate about those projects. They're going to care. Find them, and they will become your minions. Oh, and I forgot, sorry. There's plenty of space at your party table for people who are online, in person, and everyone is welcome.
So let's do a little bit of background on both of us. Kim is probably the best technical writer I've ever worked with, and I've worked with quite a few. Obviously, the skills that you bring if you're working as an SME and a tech writer are quite important. She is able to basically carve out any really complicated bit of technical documentation and whittle it down, which is incredibly important. She also has a really quite interesting background. She's been a researcher. She's been an official research aide. She's organized huge amounts of events. She's also been both a technical writer and a fiction writer. And because of that, I kind of like, as soon as we kind of started talking, I was, oh my goodness, you know everything, so this is great. I can go down too many rabbit holes. And that's my problem, is that she has the ability to kind of like, A, be an advocate for the user, B, actually be a documentation soothsayer. She can make all of this a lot more simple. But she can also go away and kind of scavenge around to find documentation that's already out there and say, hey, actually, maybe we should just improve this, or maybe we should completely rewrite it.
I have worked with a lot of SMEs, and I'll tell you, having somebody who has extensive developer experience, customer or user interaction, and then also the ability to take those user requirements and turn them into specifications and listen to customers and translate that into what they need is a rare commodity. So I am thankful to be able to work with someone like Heds who can say, oh yeah, I understand user requirements. I am really strong on user charisma and being able to take those things. But at the same time, that depth of knowledge, you have to be careful that you don't go too far down in the weeds. Basically, if you're working with a SME, you really want to have somebody who understands the customers, but then you also have to have somebody who can say, wait, we have to keep these things in mind and not go so far down the rabbit hole.
Okay, so really important thing to do here is whenever you're playing D&D or writing documentations, you have to establish regular game nights. It's all very well saying, again, we're going to do all this documentation, but if you don't actually go ahead and formalize it, if you don't put something in your calendar, if you don't say we're going to do this, it's very easy to just stop doing that. So first things first is we found that a bi-weekly cadence of about 4 hours worked really well for us. It was just enough time that we could put aside that nobody was really going to complain, but it also meant that we could actually start to get a list of epics, a list of issues that we were going to work through, and know how far we were going to be able to get through, in a couple of weeks, in a month, in a year. However, to do that, you do really need some buy-in from the monarch. Writing is still, unfortunately, sometimes considered by engineering departments or go-to-market as yeah, we need it, but we can talk around that, right? No. Go and make sure that your director or your manager knows the reason why you're doing this. And the simple argument I used was, hey, I get asked questions all the time. It's taking me away from the stuff that I need to do. If we do better documentation, I'm not going to get asked those questions. And it became a bit of a fait accompli at that point. All right, you spend 4 hours every 2 weeks. That'll be absolutely fine. And then don't get distracted. It's very easy for me to kind of get into a situation if I'm kind of like talking to users or if I'm doing some internal work to say, hey, I'm just focusing on this thing at the moment. Can we kind of move what we're going to do documentation-wise to tomorrow or the day after, and then kind of know that it's not going to happen. Don't get distracted. If you're going to do these regular cadences, there's a reason for doing so. And once you get into the kind of the swing of things, it just becomes easier and easier.
So how are you going to work together? And that means party cohesion. This is probably one of the most important aspects of everything. You have to understand, are you going to do things synchronously? Is everybody coming to your gaming table? Or is it going to be asynchronous? For synchronous, Heds and I have a regular cadence that we've set up. Often during our meetings, he'll be walking through whatever procedure it is that we need to capture, and I'll document it as we go. He can write config files. He can go in and find, oh, this is right, this is right, this is wrong, make those changes, potentially submit a PR for those things. Big problems get set aside into a separate doc issue. More on that later. For asynchronous, he might record a video, and then I'll go back and I'll watch that video, and I'll document off of that video, and then we'll have a Google Doc or a PR or whatever, and we'll go back and forth on it. Maybe we'll need to touch base. This works out really well. I have team members on the Tempo team who are in Australia. Syncing up with somebody who's on the East Coast versus Australia, it's difficult. So it works out really well. And that means that you are now ready to tilt at the joust. Go get those quests. So, now for the Adventurers Guild.
So, if we're going to do a D&D quest, you need some dungeon masters. That's a given. We're just the players. Who are these people? Well, product and engineering teams. They know the features that are coming up. They know the functionality being worked on. They know the roadmap. They're always under pressure for new features, and they're always under pressure for documentation as soon as that features come out into new releases. Unfortunately, sometimes they're not in a position to be able to write the documentation alongside actually writing that feature because of deadlines, because of issues coming up. So we started becoming embedded in these different teams to ensure that we could go along, we could listen to what was coming up, and we could say, okay, fine, if you kind of show me what's going on, I can go away and I can help document that afterwards. It's really important to get buy-ins from the product and the engineering teams because it will make their life easier. Again, it's a really easy argument to make. Documentation champions. So obviously we have a tech writing team at Grafana. They're really into all of the documentation that basically goes around Grafana and that we give out to our users. But there are also other documentation champions, both internal to the company and external. There's a lot of community users who say, you know, on an issue or in kind of some of the ways that we allow them to comment, hey, can we help? Can we do some other stuff? Can we oversee what's going on? And we do. We allow anybody to come and kind of, you'll see later when we kind of actually publish the changes that we're going to make in source repositories, to come along and make some comments, and we'll go back and iterate on those documentation. And of course, that comes to the open source community as well. They're the ones who can see the gaps in documentation. They're the people who know the use cases. They're the best at understanding what they want to do with the product, and not kind of like listening to how they want to use stuff and how they actually want to move forwards with that product is not going to get you decent documentation at all. They're the ones who are passionate about it and want to move it forwards. They're the ultimate champions for every product that we have.
So now you got to get in. You've identified your workflow and how you're going to work and who you're going to work with. So now choose your first quest. Understand what your current documentation looks like. Where are their gaps? Where are their pain points? Understand how much you can get done with your regular cadence. Chunk your work. If you have a big project, chunk it into reasonable things. Okay, I can get this done, I can get this done. That's a lot easier than trying to do a huge, humongous project that feels like it's never going to get out the door. You lose momentum. Make sure that you set expectations. If you have to go to the king or queen of your department and justify your time, say, okay, this quarter I'm going to be, or this sprint time, I'm going to be doing these things for documentation. Set expectations, because you don't want people to say, oh, well, you didn't meet this. Make sure they understand the value of what you're doing. Promote that value. And then you have to make sure that you're also, back one, fight off the monsters. Don't get distracted. Establish what great documentation looks like. What's your long-term goal? Do you have a big vision for what you want things to look like down the road? Prioritize the work that gets users' needs done first. And then go grab the loot and establish a trade route. Give readers the chance to comment on your work, get feedback, get beta readers if you can. Divvy up your spoils, and don't get eaten by your mimics. Okay, so you've got your players, you've got your quests. Now, make your strategy. And that means for every documentation project that you have to understand what problem you are trying to solve and who needs the information. What's currently on your map? What information do you currently have in both published content and other resources? Internal documentation, issues, specs, all of those things. Can your users accomplish the major tasks that they have with the content that you currently have? If they can't, that's a need. Understand your users. Who are your personas? Your marketing groups, your product managers, they're probably going to have ideas about who they're creating these new features for. That's also who you are writing to. Someone who is a developer has a different level of need than someone who is just a generic user. So create notes, look at what your needs are, what they need to accomplish. That gives you a list of tasks. And then you can start your quest. Go out and get it done.
We also have a writer's toolkit.
Oh.
That's one of the things we have.
We have an open source project called the Writer's Toolkit, which provides guidelines and style guides, best practices, how we actually do docs as code, which means our documentation lives in the same repository as our open source project. And it's out there. It's linked on grafana.com.
We'll give you a link at the end as well. Okay, so we have a party, we have Dungeon Masters, we have a campaign that we want to go to. Let's play the quest. So we still need a few things. When you've done your session 0, you always kind of need to have some equipment and gear that you start with. So what's the equipment and gear that you need? Well, first of all, blueprints. Functional specs, project plans, epic issues, these are all great. Again, if you embed with the team that you're kind of doing the documentation for, you can actually see what's coming up, the functional requirements for something and the design specifications for something that becomes an issue. Digging into those means you can actually start writing the documentation before that work is actually done and even PR'd, which is absolutely great. And then there's top quality gear. So obviously for D&D, you need things like swords, wands, staffs, bows, so on and so forth. When we're doing this work, what we generally tend to do is a lot of practical work. So we work in a style where Kim will document what I'm doing. So she needs to be able to document this with things like writers' toolkits. We use Google Drive to do a lot of our draft work before we turn these into PRs. She also does a huge amount of mind map work. So she will lay out exactly how all the documentation is going to work for a section and for the product as a whole in a mind map. That means I can go away and look at it asynchronously before I come and work with her. And it means that we can kind of immediately get into what we're going to do, and I know exactly where it's going to go in that flow of documentation. And then there's the source repositories where we end up putting this documentation as code as well. And then there's the technical tooling that I use. So as I'm going through work, I will need to use a bash shell. I will probably need to use kube control or K9s if I'm actually doing Kubernetes work. I will probably need to use something like JQ for doing JSON work. I'll use something like Postman to ensure that I've got repeatable, I've got tooling that allows me to keep talking to particular API endpoints with a repeatable pattern that other people could go and follow as well. So the equipment and gear is really, really important.
So as you're starting your quest, watch out for the squirrels because they can take you down rabbit holes. And it's easy to go down them. If you're doing a doc and you find, oh, this other thing is also wrong and I can fix all the things, don't fix all the things. You know, it's going to distract you. Open another doc issue. If you find something that's related, open another doc issue. You've got it captured. It's all good. And just stay focused. Ask for justification from stakeholders. If you get additional doc projects that come up, what's the real fire? What really needs to be put out? Stay focused if you can. And just remember to don't take on the overpowered monsters. Do a stat check. Make sure you're not going to get a party wipe. And ensure you chunk up work so that it can be published in little pieces instead of a massive chunk, because smaller steps are much easier than a marathon. And don't set the inn on fire.
Okay, now we can start the quest journey. And we're going to go through kind of like a daily loop that we do when we have these sessions. This is Temporia. It might look like the Tempo logo. That's purely coincidental. And we're going to kind of use a few of the places on there to kind of show you how we go through one of these loops.
So you start your journey, and you have the issue mountains and the project management peaks and the issue mountains. This means that you don't want to get lost in the fogs. You've identified a bunch of stuff that needs to be updated in your doc. How do you get to where you want to be? Well, you start in one location, and the SME and the writer can say, oh, I know which projects I have to do. I know which issues I need to tackle in order to get to where I want to be, in order to get to that cliffside fortress so your party can go loot the dungeon. Identify the most pressing needs, the things that are going to get you on that trail, issue sizing and commitments, which ones require more in-depth work versus which ones are low-hanging fruit and can be done. Tackle the issues in the importance that they are to the community, and also there's a balance and kind of a tension between what the community wants, if you work for an open source company, then also what your internal project teams want. So try to balance it, but always your user advocate, their needs come first. And dig for gold and go find the good stuff.
But you need a knowledge lake to do this. So we've picked an issue. We need to actually know how to go through this issue. So here we are at Knowledge Lake. As a SME, I talk to our user community all the time, both open source and also paid customers. And just like the bard here who's trying to figure out what the ogre is talking about, they have technical requirements, but it might not be what they think they are. So we kind of press for pain points and say, well, what is the actual problem behind this that we're going to go and document? And we talk to them again and again, and we go back and we kind of ask similar kind of questions to make sure that that is actually the pain point. And a lot of the times we actually find that that's not. And as they talk to us and as they talk about particular use cases, they actually find that the problem they actually have is somewhere down the road, or maybe it's slightly beforehand. So that's one of the things that we really, really kind of try and do, is get into conversations with those users and figure out what's going on for those issues. And it also means the way that we work internally in Grafana is that for a lot of these, we have calls or we have notes that are taken during these conversations. And because of that, I can actually kind of note, for example, in a call, particular places of interest where people say, well, the documentation on this is terrible and blah, blah, but this is the reason why. So I can asynchronously get Kim to go away and look at this and say, hey, is this something that you keep seeing? Is this something that keeps coming up? Is this actually an issue that we really need to prioritize? And again, this goes back to the list of things that we actually can then go and decide, this is more important than this other thing. And then we kind of get into the loop. So a daily working loop for us in that 4-hour period is actually working through the information that we're going to try and document. So the way that we do this is we pick one of the things off the list just before we start. We kind of do that in a couple of days running up to it. And then we start kind of thinking, okay, we need to plan out exactly what we're going to do with this. Now, there's a load of different documentation that we do, but things like installing software on a particular infrastructure, such as on Kubernetes or on a Linux node, writing a config file that produces some sort of user functionality that is really important to them, or kind of extends some functionality that is already there. We need to kind of figure out what we're going to do, and then we'll sit down, I'll start doing hands-on keyboards, and Kim will basically document everything that I do. And we'll get to the end of it, we'll say, we've done a really good job. And then either the product managers or the engineering leads or some of the engineers or internal customers or external customers will look at the PR that we put onto our open source repositories and go, what is this? So we go back and we do it again, and then we go, okay, well, it worked. This is fine this time. This is great. We understand it. We've gone through it several times. It's really, really good again. And they'll be like, yeah, okay, I kind of get the gist, but you've got an extra step there, or maybe you shouldn't have done that again. I am too bad at going down into the rabbit hole and just documenting all of the technicalities. So we'll do it again, and then Kim will say, no, we're going to simplify this. And eventually we get to a point where our users, both internal and external, will say, actually, this is good. This is great, we'll use this, and if we need to go and iterate on that again, we absolutely can. So we've done it, we pushed the PR up, it's finally got merged. We need to kind of ensure that we keep going back to our stakeholders and ensuring that this is still working. Is this something that is documentation that is good? Is it going to change in the near future? Are any new features or any new functionality going to change this? Like, again, keeping in contact with those PMs, those EMs, those both internal and external users, they'll be able to tell you what is good and what is bad, because we found that diverging from this loop basically causes you to get an arrow to the knee, and nobody wants that.
So once you've created your draft, then it's time to go to the pull request in and share your updates with your Adventurers Guild. So however you create your drafts, whether directly in Google Docs or in a PR, if you have any conversion process, verify your output includes everything that was in your original. Google Docs, their export to Markdown often leaves out the source code snippets. So it's important to go back and just check. When you are creating your PRs and your issues, make sure that you have the right set of reviewers on it. I always tag Heads. I'm always going back and I'm looking at it. If it's a really complicated one, I'll ask another writer to look. A maintainer also has to review it before it can be merged. If it's really something technical, then I may ask another SME to look at it. So it's never just one person. The more eyes on it, you can have it. But also remember, you can iterate. Get it out there. Don't try for perfect. It's important to get out there. Something is better than nothing. And be kind to your reviewers. We're all here to mentor each other and help. And someday you may be on the end of reviews. You always want to be humble and helpful.
Okay, so we've published a pull request. It's been merged. That's great. The docs are fantastic. Anybody who goes and looks at them will have a really great time. But we need to travel the information highways here. So we need to get those out somehow. How do you do that? Well, again, Grafana, we're quite lucky. We have an OSS community, and with that we have our open source repositories where anybody can raise an issue, where anybody can comment on any of the PRs that go out. But we also have community forums, and that includes an open Slack forum, which means that anybody can go and ask questions. And very often they'll go into the community forums, both in Slack and also on our posting boards, and say, hey, we noticed this documentation has changed, but this isn't great. They may come from lots of different places. Make sure that you're looking at all of these different places where the community can actually go and comment to ensure that you're getting information both out there and also getting the comments back. And that will help you feel the impact of your docs. What's really useful if you have them is the ability to go away and track reading stats as well. So at Grafana, obviously, we deal with observability. We have all our four telemetry signals that we dog food internally as well. And part of that is looking at the documentation that's out there. We actually track the readership of all the documentation. When we put new documentation out, if it's actually pretty good, we see the readership stats go really high up. If it's pretty bad, you won't see much of a change, and then it tends to go down. This is a really good marker to actually kind of get a feeling of, even if people aren't commenting, is the documentation good or bad? Tracking stats is really, really good.
So how do you bring your users value? You give them documentation treasure. And so there's different phases of projects. Your early projects, your documentation is basically your code, your README files. But you also have really technical users. You've got your early adopters who are seeing the promise of this project. They don't mind fiddling with stuff. They've got more tolerance for having to tweak things themselves. But as you move into gaining ground, more users, that tolerance for fiddly bits goes down. So you have to provide more information. You have to explain concepts, provide reference material and procedures. And then as you even reach a bigger audience, then the documentation also has to be more accessible to that larger audience. This broader audience is also then again less tolerant of faults like the early adopters might be. You'll need more content to help guide people, tutorials, how-to guides, more comprehensive documentation.
And then finally, you need to welcome other people into your documentation. Somebody might invite you to a karaoke party. It's all very well kind of going and doing this, and we kind of did this in a vacuum for almost a year, didn't we? But really, ideally, what you want is to have more people into this. You need clerics who understand the underlying platforms that you're going to be installing onto. You need barbarians who will fearlessly go up against any issues. You need wizards who'll delve into the codes to actually find the answers for features and functionality and even bugs, even though the engineering groups might not be doing it for that particular product. And then you need rangers who'll marshal all of this work together and ensure that you have a cadence to keep going. We've created starter kits of tools, documentation and frameworks within Grafana. Some of them we've made public, and including, again, the Writers Toolkit. There'll be a link to that at the end. But keep advertising. People will be interested. If you start doing this kind of work and you make it known internally or externally that you're doing this, people will come and they'll start helping because they'll want to, whether it is just reviewing what you've done, whether it is commenting on it, or whether it's actually writing stuff. We found a lot of, especially in the community, they'll say, hey, you're doing this. Well, can we add this to the documentation? And we'll go and review it and say, sure, that makes a whole lot of sense. Show your enthusiasm for it, because if you do, you'll bring more and more people into it. And eventually you'll be able to not just have a small adventuring party, but an entire guild, and you'll be able to fight off the dragon of ignorance and ensuring that knowledge wins the day. So as I say, we've been doing this for about 3 years. After about a year, people's really started to take note. And the way that we work now, the regular cadence, the way that we embed into the teams, the way that we actually find the functions and feature, the new functionality coming up, the new features, the issues that are out there, going away and documenting this, pretty much all of the underlying telemetry databases now use the same process. Both the tech writing team and the field engineering team have officially bought into this along with the engineering teams and R&D. So this is the way that we now kind of pretty much do everything. We have a regular cadence, and we ensure that different field engineers and different specialists work with different technical writers to ensure that we can get a good cadence going and ensure that all of that documentation is constantly being improved and updated.
So, I have to remember that. So, the important thing is that you are the user advocates. You can go out there and you can make a huge difference. It never ends, though. It's about empowering your users, getting out there and saying, this project is so cool, you care about this. If you can't code, you can still contribute. You know, it's important. And people need to understand that and be welcome. Show your enthusiasm. Let them feel that they've rolled a D20 and gotten a 20.
So no, it's not the end, it's ever going, we all know that. But it's really worth doing. And as somebody who was kind of like in the past a developer and an SRE who was like, I don't want to touch documentation anyway, I've actually found it really empowering to be able to go back and work in such a way that allows me to actually contribute to those documentations as somebody who is a user. That's basically our talk. We've been Kim Nylander and Head Simons. Those are QR code links to our LinkedIn pages, and there is a link to the Grafana Writers Toolkit as well. Any questions? Thank you. Any questions? Yes, sir.
I think you said you're 3 years down this path. I think we're about 6 months down this path. How do you get your community to be interested? You mentioned community being experts for the use cases that you have. We have a lot of community input. We don't get to have community input per se on our documentation. How do you get there?
It's a bit of a mixture. For a lot of it, I will go into the community forums and I'll say, hey, we published this new documentation. Is anybody interested in it? And you'll find that there will be regular people who will come back and say, oh, yeah, you've done more documentation. I'm interested in this. And as they kind of get more well-known as well, you'll find that other people that kind of feel that they're kind of a specialist in some way will also start to get involved. So that's one of the ways of doing it. We have people, because we have open source repositories and obviously anybody can make a PR on an issue, we actually have folks who will never go into any of the community boards or Slack channels or anything like that, but they will see that something has changed, so they'll be watching the repositories. So when we have new documentation, they'll be looking for /docs, right? So they'll go in and say, oh, you've got new documentation, and they will kind of just post on there, and we'll never get a peep out of them anywhere else, but we'll have that conversation with them backwards and forwards in an issue. So it's really kind of just ensuring that you can kind of publicize it. Occasionally, we have put stuff out on LinkedIn, That's variable because obviously LinkedIn is seen as a big corporate entity, and it is a big corporate entity, right? But it is a good place to kind of update, especially when we're doing things like new releases. So when we have major releases of Grafana or some of the underlying database products, we'll also put them out on there. And that tends to draw people in as well. So really, for us, it's a case of advertisation. If you can just keep going to all the different places where you think people might be looking for this stuff, you'll find one or two people who will pick it up, and then hopefully there'll be more of a groundswell as well after that.
So one thing that I do is we have community calls for Tempo, and I make sure that every time somebody has a question, I'm popping up with a link to the documentation. And so they start to see that there is doc out there, because a lot of times they're only in the repository, they're not on the website and seeing all the doc. Even though the doc lives in the repository, you can't make the assumption that somebody says, oh, docs, right? Not everybody reads, unfortunately. The other thing that you can do is I kind of follow the questions on Slack. And if somebody has a question, if I'm in there, I'll try to say, oh, here's this documentation. Or if it looks like it really might be related because they had a frustration they couldn't find, I'll say, okay, I'm going to open a doc issue for this. And so I'm trying to lead by example and say, oh, if there's a problem, open a doc issue, raise that awareness. If they already have a problem, I'll go and look and say, hey, we've got this doc issue. Would you be willing to add notes to this about what your problem is? And sometimes just getting them to do that level of making a comment pushes them just to say, oh, I know enough about this to document my problem. Maybe I can document the solution, because maybe they've tested it. It's just a matter of raising awareness and visibility consistently. If they see it out there, they'll think about it.
Yes?
So I basically want to know what you think about LLMs and how LLMs could assist.
We have people on our team who use LLMs, and we actually we're looking at adding that information into the toolkit. There's a lot of things to consider with that. I'm going to do an aside. I write fiction. I have a lot of friends who are professional fiction writers. There's a lot of lawsuits against LLMs because they've been trained on copyrighted material. So be aware of those factors when you go and make a decision. Do your research into whatever engine you want to use and be aware of the pending lawsuits, because I think every single major LLM and AI has a pending lawsuit, or 2 or 3 or 5 or 10. So if you want to start, look at the Authors Guild. There's a pending one against Llama and Meta right there. Okay, that aside, we are looking at ways that we can use, we've got some use cases for how we're using AI. One of those things, it's very helpful if you give it a screenshot and say, write me a summary of the things that are on this screen. That's a good starting point. If you have somebody who is new in a product and they're trying to write documentation fast because they've got a deadline, they can say, hey, give me a set of use cases for this thing based on these files that we have. But then whatever output you have has got to be vetted. I just tried doing it for release notes and went into GitHub Copilot and said, write me a summary of this PR, so using this role model for release notes, make it concise, and it gave me this long, rambling output. I took that, went into the team channel and said, hey, how is this comparatively speaking? And they said some was right, most are wrong, but some of it was very subtly wrong. So if you use output from AI, you have got to have somebody who really knows their stuff to check it, especially if you're not a SME on what you're using. So my answer is, if you know enough, it can be helpful, but if you don't know enough to be able to check the output, then make sure it's not hallucinating. So I often find when I use it, I'm a hell of a lot faster than it is using that for something. It might be a good starting point or a jumping off point. It's not going to replace what I can do. I'm a writer. I don't want something like that to write for me. But it can be helpful, just caveats.
That said, I use them all the time. So for me, a lot of the drudgery work is setting up Kubernetes clusters. If we're going to go through some documentation example, even the work that I'm not doing with Kim, and having something like Cursor to just say, just write me a load of Terraform, please, get it over and done with. It's incredibly useful. You do have to vet it. That's the one thing, right? I think that's where we've kind of diverged a little bit, is that LLMs are for everything. They can be a great tool, but if you don't review what they've output in any way, you could be setting yourself up for failure. So I think it's the same whether we're using it for technical writing, whether we're using it for doing day-to-day coding, whether we're doing it for infrastructure, or whether we're doing it actually for engineering work. As long as you vet it, as long as you make sure that what you're getting out the other side is actually useful, it can be a great tool, but just be wary.
There are also legal implications. A lot of times, if it's in the documentation, that means it is officially supported. So be aware of anything that's in your docs, that there can be other ramifications from it. So be careful if you're using an LLM. It's like with anything, any tool. Do your research.
Yes?
So this might, this is too far off topic, because I know this is a little bit more customer-facing documentation. But we have technical writers that write that for our places. But it's kind of engineers that write the technical documentation for internal use. And one of the things that you hear a lot is, well, are you even working on your documentation? And it is just this high-level word that nobody wants to think about what they actually mean. You guys that go about like writing documentation about documentation in terms of like method strategies that make sure that getting all the content in there.
We do.
Writer's going to write. We have the Writer's Toolkit, which does talk about how to do process and stuff. We also have templates in there for what do you include in a task? What do you include in a concept? What do you include in a reference doc? So definitely go and look at that, and that'll be a lot of help. I was an internal technical writer for IT for 8 years. So my specialty was getting people to realize that they needed to write the doc as they did it. I've kind of gotten the Tempo team really good to where now when they're doing a new product or a new release, they have what I refer to as minimum viable documentation. And that means define what it is, how you use it, give an example, ideally also give the benefit of why somebody should use it. That they don't have to go down the rabbit hole with use cases and all that other stuff, just enough so people have an example and can understand it. That's what I expect from the engineers. So that's not as onerous as having to write the big stuff. You can iterate on it. If you write something, make sure that you at least have something in it. I am always in the Tempo PR saying, does this have user impact? All the time. And so the team is just like, this last release, I did the release notes. Every single PR that had user impact had documentation with it. So taking me some time, but you just get them to think about it. It just becomes part of the process. It's, again, visibility.
I think embedding as well also has helped us. We found that kind of going in and going to the weekly meetings, bringing things up. Because I work in the GTM side, I do go and talk to a lot of paying customers. And that allows me to bring the same pain points back again and again. And once a team, an engineering team especially kind of says, okay, what are the problems they're facing? Well, this has come up again and this has come up again. It kind of gives them an impetus now to actually write the documentation along with it, because I'm just going to keep hassling them at some point. Because I'm the one who has to go back and talk to the customer or the prospect. So I have to go and say, okay, it's coming, but there might not be any documentation to start with. It's not really kind of like something I want to do. And we found more that the more that we go and talk to them, the more that we embed ourselves in, the more we help them get ahead of themselves, they're more likely to write documentation aside as well. So actually in the last 3 years, the amount of documentation that engineers write at Grafana has exploded hugely because of the way that we've been working with this model.
Writers can't be a blocker. There aren't enough writers usually. And so you have to kind of shift left and ask people to take ownership of what they're creating and just write even just a little bit, or at least the PR comments. Oh my God, we have some people who write these beautiful, they write books in the PR comments, but they may not write the documentation, but the documentation's in the PR. So, when I'm going out and I'm trying to find docs for stuff, I'll scavenge and, the PR comments, tickets, Slack threads, whatever. You find documentation in a lot of places. It's not always in one spot.
Kind of piggybacking off of that, how do you address concerns around maintainability? Like a concern I get a lot is that, our docs get loaded and developers got big, so what's stopping in the first place?
Oh, I've been places where I was told, I don't know why you're here, no one reads the documentation, to my face multiple times. So I feel that. The point is, it becomes a question. Okay, we're doing an update to this. During your planning process, you go in and you say, are there doc needs? So our planning spreadsheet has a column that says doc need or needs docs, and that way we can automatically go through it, and the person who's doing it says, oh, right, we do need documentation. And I'm their polite pesterer, always saying, hey, if we're doing this, do we need docs for this? And it's just a matter of them thinking about it. You get them thinking about it enough, then they're like, okay, I'm not going to get pestered by Kim. She's not going to be coming over here and, poking me. But it's really just having it become part of the process. That's where it's not really a struggle. It's just inserting yourself and being fearless with your questioning and like, just go in and say, hey, does this have user impact? Sometimes the answer is no, it's internal only, but raising that awareness, and pretty soon other people like asking the same question. Our engineering manager fills out the docs needed column now before we have our planning meeting. It's great. Takes a while, but just be consistent.
The other thing we do is we go back through the loop. So if another piece of functionality has occurred in a particular component and we have docs on that component, we'll go through the entire component again, because it takes us 15 minutes to go through that and make sure that nothing else is out of date or anything is stale. And that means that we have the impetus then to go back, okay, we're not just going to focus on one portion of this document, we're going to go through the entire document again. And we often find stuff that's like, oh, that's changed in the My Release, or maybe that got patched out or something like that. And that helps us go back and do that impetus again.
You also periodically do a review of your entire documentation tree.
What we've just done.
And and you restructure, reorganize, and you remove stuff. So there's always a maintenance process. And if you don't have a dedicated tech writer, then hopefully people are willing to step up and look at it and say, oh, we don't need this anymore.